For most people, when you say Sun Tzu, what comes to mind is battlefields, commanders, and those strategy quotes, shared by people who've never actually read him. You know, those things that circulate like success stories. They talk about the man as if he is victory itself, like some mysterious figure who cracked the psychology of conflict. But let me tell you the truth. That version doesn't reflect the essence of it at all. Because when you strip away those fancy sentences and myths, you start to see something far more interesting. Sun Tzu's concern wasn't winning wars. On the contrary, it was avoiding them. His mind wasn't focused on how do I win, but rather, what will this cost? And in a world constantly at war, consuming itself, Sun Tzu's message was very clear. For a state, the biggest problem is not the enemy. It's the economic burden that comes after the war ends. People think the art of war is about fighting, but in reality it's entirely about finance, money, cost, sustainability. Now, to explain this properly, we need to go back to the time Sun Tzu lived in. Imagine China in the 6th to 5th century BCE, fragmented into many kingdoms, each one thinking, I'll unite them all. But in doing so, they're draining their treasuries. Constant wars, alliances forming and breaking, armies growing. No more small aristocratic duels. Now there are massive armies. And these armies aren't just fighting, they're consuming the economy. When a king sends his army to war, he's actually borrowing from his future. And most of the time, he can't repay that debt, just like taking a loan from the IMF today. In the West, ancient wars are often told as heroic stories, but back then, war wasn't about heroism. It was about logistics. The moment the army moves, the meter starts running. Food, horses, armor, craftsmen, swords, carriers, all of it costs money. A war lasting a few months can bankrupt a small state. A war lasting a year can collapse even a large one. But no one stops, because everyone fears each other. A full-on arms race. This is the world Sun Tzu enters. But not as a philosopher. Not as someone sitting around thinking life is beautiful. The man exists right in the middle of a crisis. Let me put it in modern terms. Sun Tzu isn't a strategy guru. He's a risk manager. He looks at the numbers, the costs, the time, and he says, this doesn't work. You're winning battles, but bankrupting your country. Many rulers saw the enemy as the greatest threat. To Sun Tzu, the real enemy was the cost of war itself. That's why the most important sentence of the book comes right at the beginning. War is of vital importance to the state. But vital here doesn't mean something ordinary. It means dangerous, destructive. If not controlled, it will consume everything you have. And throughout the book, what he's really explaining is, how can I end a war cheaply? Look, even his most famous quote is actually about finance. The greatest victory is winning without fighting. This isn't some cheap line. For those who think it carries huge meaning. Prolonged war benefits no country, he says. That's not poetry, that's accounting. As war drags on, the system collapses. Sun Tzu's concern isn't victory, it's surviving without going bankrupt. To understand this better, think about how war used to be. In the past, war was almost like a display of honor. Then things grew. Populations increased, weapons advanced, states had to organize financial systems, taxes increased, bureaucracies formed. War became a national project, and at the same time a deadly financial risk. Sun Tzu saw this clearly. If this continues, you will destroy yourselves. That's why he stripped war of its romanticism and turned it into cold accounting. He looks at war like a balance sheet: supply chains, resource consumption, opportunity cost. He was thinking about these centuries ago, and he understood one very clear thing. Every decision in war is actually about economics. Make one wrong move and you won't just lose the army, you'll lose the state. When you look at it this way, everything changes. He lists 5 factors at the beginning: morality, heaven, earth, the commander, discipline. These aren't mystical ideas. They're actually questions like, what will this cost me? How much can the state endure? Can the people carry this burden? Will the system hold? In other words, pure risk analysis. There are few battle scenes in the book, but a lot of logistics. He's practically explaining the cost of feeding an army. The farther the army moves from home, the higher the cost, he says. Transporting supplies is more expensive than feeding soldiers, he says. And the brutal truth is, while bad commanders chase meaningless victories, they drag their countries into ruin. The intelligence part follows the same logic. One correct piece of information can save millions. One wrong piece of information can destroy a state. Information equals money. Speed works the same way. Win fast and your costs stay low. Drag it out and you go bankrupt. The deepest point Sun Tzu makes is this: every decision has a cost, and the greatest waste is fighting unnecessary wars. He's not against war. He's against waste. And he says, if you love war, you will go bankrupt. History proves this. All states that entered prolonged wars collapsed. Those that acted smart, fast, and calculated survived longer. And this isn't just an old story. If we look at more recent history, Vietnam, Afghanistan, World War I, these countries didn't lose because they ran out of soldiers. They lost because their economies collapsed. Even today, the same logic applies. Cyber warfare, sanctions, proxy wars, all aiming for the same thing: maximum impact at minimum cost. But the key thing people miss is this: states don't collapse because they lose wars. They collapse because they run out of money. So what is real victory? Not having to rebuild your economy after the war ends. That's why this isn't a book about war, it's a book about self-control. Sun Tzu isn't really a warrior. He's a guardian, someone thinking about how a state survives. And his message is uncomfortable, but very clear. Power is not about how hard you punch. It's about how little damage you take from the opponent's punch. And history shows this. The winner isn't the bravest, it's the most disciplined. If this perspective changed something in your mind, then you've truly started to understand. If this video shifted your perspective, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like the video. See you in the next one.